Subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button below. For future webinars and online short courses, please visit our website at australianwaterschool.com.au. Welcome everyone to this Australian Water School webinar. This webinar series aims to bring you many brilliant innovative projects coming out of the global water sector, not just projects, but thinking. Today we're going to look at the important issue of implementing transboundary aquifer cooperation in Africa by Jonathan Lautze. What happens when water moves across artificial jurisdictional boundaries? Well, two things are important. Need to understand the science, need to cooperate and collaborate. People's livelihoods are at stake. Well, I won't go on. I'll leave that to Jonathan. He's got a lot to say, and I know it's going to be fantastic. My name's Trevor Pillar. I'm the National Partnerships Manager here at ISWARM. But this webinar is really about you. We're just so glad to have so many. You can see the countries represented right across the globe. Thank you for joining us today. It's going to be a fantastic time. I can't wait to hear what Jonathan has to say and to hear your questions and discussion. And don't wait, don't hesitate. I see there's a couple of questions up there already. Thanks, Len and others are writing questions. Put them up there. We'd love to see them. Well, the first few months of this year has got a lot of free webinars and a few online courses. I won't go into each one there. And behind these, there's a lot more coming on board. So stay tuned on our website and on our Twitter feed, and you'll hear more about the really good training in water management coming up from ISWARM Australian Water School. I'm now going to introduce Jonathan. He's a senior researcher at IMI South Africa office in Pretoria, led or contributed to a range of applied interdisciplinary research and development projects focused on topics such as water governance, water security, transboundary water management, climate change and water and health. There isn't much there, Jonathan, that is left out of the water issues for the world. You've been a very busy person for the last few years. Welcome.
Thank you.
And you're in Pretoria?
I am. As you mentioned, it's the International Water Management Institute Southern African office, which is here. Our office is in Pretoria, and that's where I am now.
Fantastic, yeah. And it's early morning there at the moment. Breakfast time?
Yeah, that's right. Just took a shower, made a cup of coffee.
So you're looking fresh and ready to go for it. It's like 4 p.m. here in Australia, or Central Australia here in Adelaide, where I am, and heading for a 45-degree day tomorrow. But today was pretty close to 40, so we're sitting in the cool. Look, we won't take any more time. I'm going to hand right over to you, Jonathan.
Okay, thanks, Trevor. And first off, I'll just kind of apologize to everybody. This had been scheduled for December, and it got pushed back a month. We were actually, a few of us from IMI, kicking off another project on transboundary aquifer cooperation, and actually this one was transboundary conjunctive cooperation that looked at cooperation not just on an aquifer, but on associated rivers. And so it's often a rural area in the north of South Africa for that. But the focus of today's presentation is lesson learning from cooperation around two transboundary aquifers in the Southern African region, or we often say SADC, the Southern African Development Community region. And the names of those two aquifers are listed in the title: the Ramotswa, which is shared between Botswana and South Africa, and the Stampriet, which is an aquifer shared between Botswana, South Africa, and Namibia. And I'll highlight right up front, my name is in the lead on this, but a lot of the thinking behind this was the outcome of quite a number of us. And you can see that number, I think there's around eight or so listed among the names there on the cover page of this presentation. And among those, I'll highlight in particular the last one, Thales, who's at UNESCO, who coordinated the work in the Stampriet project. Okay, thank you. So with that, I'll kind of give an overview of the presentation for today. So I'll start off with just some background. I don't know the level of the audience and how much you know about transboundary aquifers in general, or the number of transboundary aquifers in the region of Southern Africa, or SADC. And then I'll actually go into the two specific projects. The Ramotswa project. So the project is the name of the shared aquifer. I'll review some objectives, the major components of the project, and so forth. And similarly with the Stampriet, or more broadly, it's referred to as a Greta project. And I'll again there review some of the major achievements, components, and objectives of that one. And then the main thrust of this, I think, is the final bullet that's listed there, which is trying to derive some lessons from some of these initial experiences in transboundary aquifer cooperation, particularly in SADC. In this, I mean, but when I say SADC, I mean Southern Africa. These are, to my understanding, the first two initial efforts towards cooperating around transboundary aquifers. So deriving some lessons and just some more general observations or reflections around this. A lot of the presentation will be focused on that. Yeah, okay, so what about transboundary aquifer cooperation in SADC or Southern Africa? So you can see a map there of the Southern African region, and we've now identified 33 transboundary aquifers, which has been quite a process. If you can go back and look 10 to 20 years ago, I think there were far fewer that have been recognized, and there's been a lot of progress that's been made, not just on identifying or recognizing them, but on delineating their boundaries. And I think, you know, there's constantly progress being made on this, but I think the map there reflects close to the state of the art in terms of where we stand on this. And when I say we, I should give a lot of credit. IGRAC and Gert-Jan Niesten in particular has written about this and has been involved in a lot of this work on identifying aquifers. So we're now around 33 transboundary aquifers in SADC. You know, they range in size quite dramatically from quite small ones. You know, you see the second bullet there, basically from, you know, as small as 400 square kilometers to greater than 300 square kilometers, 300,000 square kilometers, excuse me. As I said, Ramotswa and Stampriet were two of the initial ones that have received focus on strengthening coordination between countries. So you can see the circles there, identifying where those two are. So the smaller one, probably on the right side of the screen you're looking at, or a little bit to the east, basically, is the Ramotswa. And the larger one, with the larger circle there to the west, is the Stampriet aquifer. And in terms of the two projects, you know, I said these are two of the initial transboundary aquifers to receive focus on strengthening cooperation. In terms of these two projects, both have had 2 phases, and, you know, they haven't been in direct parallel, but it's been close to it. So, so the Stampriet phase ran from 2013 to 2015, and Stampriet phase 2 started in 2016 and is actually winding down. I believe they're having their closing workshop in March of this year, so in a couple of months from now, in 2019. The Ramotswa phase 1 ran from 2015 to 2017, and phase 2 runs from 2017 to 2019, and we're actually looking at our closing workshop in April of this year. So as I highlighted up front, the thrust of this presentation is on understanding the kind of the lessons that can be derived from these two initial efforts. And then hopefully this can strengthen as we look towards others of the 33 that haven't yet received focus. Others of these 33 aquifers, what lessons can we learn from these initial 2 efforts and apply elsewhere? So that's the main aim of this presentation. To give a bit more background though, you know, I just highlighted, and you've already picked up the different sizes of the 2 aquifers. So just to give you a little bit detail on some of the basics around them. So you see the arrows there pointing to the 2, basically the Southwest Kalahari, the Karoo, that's basically the Stampriet. So the Stampriet tends to be, it's a larger aquifer, but it's less populated. So the population density is not as high as the Ramotswa. And you can see also on the far right, there's not necessarily an arrow there, but the level of rainfall. So the Stampriet is an area of greater aridity. They're both somewhat arid environments, but the Stampriet is particularly arid. The Ramotswa, again, if you're looking down on your screen, population density is higher, and then rainfall is a little bit higher. And I will highlight these numbers are fluid. We're constantly learning more about basically the boundaries of the aquifer, the population in the aquifer, and then we're therefore then kind of strengthening numbers around the precise area and precise population. But nonetheless, I think a key message here is that Ramotswa is a little bit smaller, but a little bit more population dense, and Stampriet is larger and a little less population. And then the primary focus of this presentation is on these two, but I just wanted to highlight it kind of as a little bit of an aside, that this is a growing area of work. So in the last 6 months, two more projects have come online, and almost inevitably, some of the learnings and knowledge from those other two projects bleeds into what I present. And so, you know, so the new projects are focused on the Tuli Karoo, which is shared between Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe, and then the Shire, which is shared between Malawi, Mozambique, and then we're trying to continue some collaboration on the Ramotswa, which is an area that I mentioned we've worked for some 4 years now. So these are additional aquifers which we're now expanding into and working around strengthening coordination there. And again, it's increasingly focused on conjunctive. I think you noticed that in the title of this slide, that you know, we're broadening from simply aquifer cooperation to thinking that we also need to think about incorporating surface water. And I think that's a message that's come through from work on the Ramotswa. Yeah, so that's a bit of an aside. So comparing project experiences, what's the main objective of this presentation today? As I said earlier, and I'm just reminding ourselves of it, to generate some lessons and insights from these initial two experiences in transboundary aquifer cooperation in the Southern African region, and we hope those can then be applied or learned or used to inform future efforts around transboundary aquifer cooperation, or if it kind of broadens slightly to be transboundary conjunctive cooperation, you know, we can still derive lessons as well. So I think that's the main objectives. And then basically how are we doing that? Basically the idea is to just compare some of the main objectives, activity, and some of the main points of progress in the two projects. And so in terms of the format or layout of this presentation, what I'm going to do is present a few minutes on each of the two projects, and then transition into some lessons that were pulled out of these two experiences. And I think the primary focus is on those lessons. I think that's where there's some novelty here. So yeah, so the background on the Ramotswa, I've highlighted where it is, but again, you can see more concretely there. So it's in the Limpopo Basin. It's at the far upstream portion. We often say it's in the upper Limpopo. So it's in the far upstream portion of the Limpopo Basin. And what has happened, and I've highlighted this is often happened when you're working in transboundary aquifers, boundaries get progressively more precise. So actually this map, I think, is from still a couple years ago, where the shaded area within the box there highlights an area within which you'll find the Ramotswa aquifer. So we progressively narrowed it down. So basically, though, it's in the upper Limpopo Basin. It's actually not far from Gaborone, which is the capital of Botswana. Yeah, so that's where the location is. The objectives was to support a long-term joint vision and cooperation around the shared groundwater resources in this upper Limpopo region, you know, primarily focusing on Ramotswa. And then to contribute to facilitation of joint management and better groundwater governance, focusing on a range of issues like, you know, basically strengthening coordination, exchanging scientific knowledge, and contributing towards environmental sustainability. And then we hope all of this helps to strengthen trust and transparency in between the two countries in the development and use of groundwater resources in this border region. So those were the overarching objectives of the Ramotswa project. I highlighted earlier, there's been two main phases. The first ran from 2015 to 2017. The second ran from 2017 and will close in a few months. And so what were the main kind of components of the different phases? So I'll provide a bit of highlight on some of these in the next couple of slides. But basically, in phase one, you know, a major starting point was just to understand where we're starting. So that was captured or reflected in a baseline report, just a compilation and synthesis of existing data and information on the Ramotswa aquifer and associated areas. Geophysical work was also done, and this was aimed at understanding kind of aquifer and geology associated with the aquifer in order to delineate it as precisely as possible. There was a RIMS development. RIMS stands for the Ramotswa Information Management System, and I'll provide a bit of more detail on that shortly. So this was a kind of an online viewer that kind of presented or helped to visualize key data that were collected in the related to the aquifer, such as borehole locations. And then in the first phase, there was also first steps towards what we call a JSAP, which is a short for a Joint Strategic Action Plan. So we hoped that countries would converge towards a common vision and a common set of actions for management of the shared aquifer, and those are captured in this Joint Strategic Action Plan. In phase 2, we've focused more on hydrogeologic modeling, which I think speaks for itself. We've engaged on managed aquifer recharge potential assessment. So this is viewed as one of the key opportunities in a lot of these transboundary aquifers, if potential is confirmed to exist. But there's a lot of work around confirming potential, identifying water sources that can supply managed aquifer recharge, and then potentially looking at potential adverse impacts of MARS, such as mixing. And then ag water solutions was another component of the second phase. And so ag water solutions was looking at rolling out technologies that can improve water efficiency and productivity in the context of basically very limited water resources in the Limpopo. Can we stretch these farther through use of technologies like wetting front detectors and so forth? And then we've tried to expand the Ramotswa Information Management System in the second phase, and then we've also worked toward finalization of the Joint Strategic Action Plan. I might stop just for a second here, or 30 seconds, to see if there's any questions so far.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great start. And we're zooming through the time just to keep us moving along. That would be really good, Jonathan. And there are a few questions. If I can just highlight one of them here as a short one, but what are the tools and methodology you use to identify the transboundary aquifers? It's that last question. You might see it up on your Q&A screen, Jonathan. What are the tools?
Yeah, okay, that's a good broader question, and that was work that was largely conducted by IGRAC to do this mapping. IGRAC is at least facilitated through IGRAC, this International Groundwater Resource Assessment Center. And so they used a range of tools to pinpoint or to work towards precision of these locations. And in terms of the detailed methods, I will need to kind of redirect that towards them.
Yep, no, that's all right. That's okay. And maybe we can answer some of these questions offline too, out of sessions. But that's good.
Okay.
The other one was, what type of hydrological model have you used?
I believe they use ModFlow.
Yep, right. Okay, yeah, that's good. That's great. They're shorter answer questions, and appreciate your questions coming through. Len Drury has asked, why are the regional sandstone aquifers under Libya, Sudan, Egypt, South Sudan, etc., so poorly monitored? You probably.
No, I saw that one actually. I replied to him.
Okay, great.
I threw it through a message, but I mean, and what I highlighted, and I hope I can come back to that in the context of this presentation, is I think some of those challenges. I mean, the focus of this presentation is not the Middle East area, which is I think sure. But that said, I think some of the challenges are similar here.
Similar.
And I mean, I guess it's, I think it comes down to government prioritization. In the transboundary context, I think there's additional challenges. I think one of the ones he mentioned might have been just within one country, Saudi Arabia. The other one was transboundary. So in a transboundary context, there's additional steps that need to be taken, which require time and transaction, and then often funding. And so mobilizing support for that is not always straightforward. I think that contributes to some of the explanation of why that's not happening.
Yeah. Look, there's one more that we can maybe do just before we get back into it again. From Martin O'Rourke. For the MAR, where does the recharge water come from, considering that there is low rainfall?
So we looked at that. So the best bet option in our case, there's seasonal runoff, and seasonal runoff, use of seasonal runoff has triggered a range of issues. So the short answer is seasonal runoff. The long answer is, there's perceptions around taking surface water and putting it in the ground. I think there's a lot of security with knowing and seeing surface water in a dam, in this case, the Gaborone Dam. And when you discuss with stakeholders like government officials, the potential to inject that into the ground, I think they could have concerns that they cannot see it. They can't, it's not as tangible to them. So yeah, but basically seasonal runoff is the short answer. Is looked like our best option. Yeah, we looked at others, including wastewater and so forth. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you. We won't go through this. A couple more questions there, but maybe we'll just let you keep going with this presentation. We're into about 15 or 20 minutes, and we haven't reached halfway yet, I noticed. So I'm going to hand over right back to you again. We're in your hands, but we probably have to keep the speed moving along a little bit. But this is fantastic stuff. Hand back over to you.
Okay, Jonathan. Great. And I noted on the timeline, so I'll try to proceed a little bit briskly. So yep. Yeah, I did mention in terms of get back to the project components of the Ramotswa. So as I highlighted earlier, the baseline report was one of the main achievements in the year one, which is a common starting point, it seems, for a lot of transboundary aquifer projects, just figuring out what's happening. So it was a year-long effort. We ended up kind of distilling 5 key issues, which are listed at the bottom of your screen. Chief among these issues was just understanding the resource. So even after all that effort, what we, it's kind of like one of those classic dilemmas where you spend all this time trying to get your handle on what's happening, and then you just realize there's a host of, additional questions it helps to yield. So, yeah, but I think that's still a valuable exercise to then identify some of those additional questions. So yeah, so in any case, we distilled towards 5 key issues, which are listed at the bottom there. Basically understanding the resource, contamination issues, policy implementation challenges, and then basically water scarcity and kind of, in a way, distribution of scarcity is what the last point hits on. Yeah, MAR potential and managed aquifer recharge potential assessment was something else we looked at. I noted the question just now. So we looked at potential for MAR in the Ramotswa area. We looked at suitable locations, as the question asked, where's the water sources come from? We eventually identified seasonal runoff was our best bet. And then that's, as I said, it triggered a host of issues around potential kind of quote unquote loss of surface water flow or surface water storage in a dam. Even if there's less evaporation when you store it in the ground, there's still cultural concerns around not seeing it in a dam that are associated with use of seasonal runoff. So that's emerged. So that was MAR. Ag water solutions is something else I highlighted in terms of trying to stretch limited water resources further, and trying also to look at constraints to adoption. And among those constraints to adoptions, one that we suspected was irrigation. Maybe in some of these like furrow irrigation or lower tech, simpler irrigation schemes, we kind of questioned whether it was suited to use some of these, relatively high tech tools, and we found it wasn't. That we found that it was fine. We could use these high tech tools even on simple irrigation schemes. So that was quite a lesson, and we found that these did help stretch limited water resources quite a bit further. So that we found some positive out of this. So that was another component. RIMS, as I highlighted earlier, a tool for improving groundwater management and cooperation, a GIS-based online viewer. So it allowed us to take the data that we compiled and to the extent we could make it visualizable, put it in this online viewer and show, whoever's interested, hopefully the 2 countries, where boreholes are, where other key parameters are, and so forth. So those are some of the major, one final component was this joint strategic action plan. We worked towards a joint vision, it's listed there, that the 2 countries agreed on: water security and sustainable socioeconomic development in the Ramotswa Transboundary Aquifer area through joint research and management. And then we identified a set of 3 components. One was focusing on management. Another was focusing on enhancing institutions and capacity. And a third was focusing on expanding research and knowledge. And then within that, identified a range of actions that can be implemented practically. And so one thing I'll highlight, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but joint research, the need for more knowledge and research came through more prominently than we were expecting. You'll notice if you look at that vision statement at the top of your screen, it's right in there. I'll be honest, I personally wasn't expecting in kind of a broad vision statement research feature so prominently, but I think again, it just underscores the need to understand more about this aquifer system. And probably this is indicative. So in terms of this Stampriet aquifer system, which is the other of the two that we're focusing on, this is in a different basin. It's called the Orange Senku Basin. It occupies a larger portion of that basin. And then it's shared between 3 countries. So the largest is Namibia. It's about 73% is in Namibia, and then Botswana and South Africa each have a portion as well. It's a farming area, so you can see there's 1,200 farms there, which are mostly in Namibia. And then groundwater use is heavily for irrigation, but then some livestock watering and some domestic use as well. And then as I highlighted earlier, it's a relatively lightly populated area. Again, this one is similar to the Ramotswa, it's in the upstream portions of the basin in which it's located. So this project is called GRETA, or the Governance of Groundwater Resources in Transboundary Aquifers. It actually focused on a few globally, but in Southern Africa, it was focused on the Stampriet. So as I highlighted earlier, I had 2 phases. The first was focused on, it was 2013 to 2015. It was focused on an in-depth assessment of this system, the Stampriet aquifer system. The second phase was focused on capacity building and development of a numerical model. And then it was also focused on, and that's red highlighted at the bottom, institutionalizing cooperation. And what does this mean? I'll go into it now. So basically, there was a lot of effort put in this project on linking with this organization called ORASCOM, which is the RBO that is concerned with the Orange Senku. It stands for Orange Senku, I think it's Orange Senku River Basin Commission. And luckily, in their case, and it's interesting from an institutional perspective, they have a groundwater hydrology committee. And they had that already in this ORASCOM. And so work on this particular aquifer in the Orange Senku Basin, the Stampriet, was able to link with this, was able to link with the RBO, and the conduit of this linkage was this groundwater hydrology committee. So the timeline for this was that Namibia presented in May 2017, so you can realize this is fairly fresh stuff. We're talking less than 2 years ago. Namibia presented a proposal to nest cooperation on the Stampriet in what they called this multi-country cooperation mechanism, MCCM, into this ORASCOM. And then in the course of 2017, progress was made. ORASCOM commissioners supported this. There were study visits elsewhere to basically the northern portion of Africa, the Sahara-Sahel, to learn from and share experiences. And then in late 2017, there were milestones set for moving forward on this. So as I said, how was this done? So you can see kind of the schematic for ORASCOM, and a lot of RBOs have organograms or schematics like this. So as I said, the key conduit was this groundwater hydrology committee, which actually not a lot of RBOs have. So it's a nice door opener for a linkage between cooperation around particular aquifers in bigger basins and in those in the RBOs. So there at the bottom of your screen, you'll see this STAS or Stampriet aquifer system, multi-country cooperative mechanism with focal points from the 3 countries. BW is Botswana, FPNA is like focal point for Namibia, and so forth for ZA is South Africa. So these channeled through, presented their proposals to the Groundwater Hydrology Committee, and then that was taken forward, and then it was linked. What are the objectives of this MCCM? It's to institutionalize cooperation. What does that mean practically? So in the short term, it's a lot of joint study and continued characterization on this Stampriet system, and to generate a flow of data, like including boreholes, for example, into this ORASCOM, and then to continue reporting on activities, as this groundwater hydrology committee meets, and in the long term, hopefully the aim is to broaden, to move, as the kind of final point on the slide indicates, to move from data collection and exchange to broader strategizing and kind of joint advising of SADC countries on how to improve management or coordinate management in the on this shared aquifer and related resources. And then in the course of 2018, you saw on the timeline in 2017, it's moved farther forward in the course of 2018. So again, it's quite fresh and quite new, and it's quite exciting. So what are the broader lessons that can be derived from this? First off, different options for project design. So as I highlighted some of the components of Ramotswa, and then I highlighted some of the components of Stampriet. So there was some alignment. So basically, whatever we want to call it, a baseline report or transboundary aquifer assessment, it seemed like the common starting point. That basically we need to understand what's happening. Another common element was information management system. Both wanted to compile information, help make it visualize it to the different stakeholders, and then ongoing dialogues was another common element. So these seem to be common elements that might be useful as we look at future transboundary aquifers. Some differences as well. Ramotswa undertook a lot of work around ag water solutions, probably investigated managed aquifer recharge more intensively, and we've undertaken a joint strategic action plan as well. Stampriet has focused more on a multi-country cooperation mechanism, which I just highlighted, and that's something Ramotswa really hasn't focused as much on. Although we've tried to make linkages with we have a JPTC, a Joint Permanent Technical Committee in our case, and LIMCOM, but Stampriet is probably ahead of us there. So, anyways, there's differences. There's no right or wrong. I think the broader hope is these can be put in a toolbox, and as we look to future transboundary aquifers or shared surface groundwater systems, these could be drawn on. Another lesson is that transboundary aquifer cooperation is a long haul. So in both projects, it looks like a good portion of the first phase was focused on just getting a handle on what's happening in this baseline report or transboundary aquifer assessment. A lot of work was done to pinpoint the delineation of aquifers, and then obtaining and synthesizing data took a long time, in cases like more than a year. And so I think the bottom line is it's a long-term endeavor, transboundary aquifer cooperation. So you might adjust expectations accordingly. And again, I think the data constraints when it comes to groundwater or aquifers are probably higher than when it comes to shared surface waters. And one might brace for this. As I've highlighted probably throughout this presentation, knowledge gaps or data limitations was something else. And so even after a lot of effort to compile data, there were some still basic parameters that remain to be conclusively sorted out, determined, like withdrawal, renewable recharge, and a recommendation falling out of both projects. Something like a joint monitoring program may work towards addressing these limitations. So moving forward, that's actually something we're trying to explore, an ongoing joint monitoring program to better understand the resource. And there's 5 of these lessons. So a fourth one was to consider the basin-wide river basin organization. So in some ways, the Stampriet project benefited from probably an RBO that was a little bit more advanced, is further along than the one in, because theirs was located in the Orange Senku, and then Ramotswa was located in a different basin, which is Limpopo, which has its LIMCOM, but with Limpopo Watercourse Commission. But Limpopo Watercourse Commission is a little bit newer RBO. It doesn't have a groundwater hydrology committee yet that can potentially advocate for or absorb work on a particular aquifer. So consider the basin-wide RBO, particularly when you're thinking of institutionalization and institutional linkages and sustainability. I think that's another key lesson that, so work on the Stampriet was able to benefit from a RASCOM, a strong basin-wide RBO with a groundwater hydrology committee. Ramotswa project didn't have this benefit. And so, Yeah, so as the second point highlights there, so existence of a strong river basin organization that already gives focus to groundwater can kind of elevate and sustain cooperation on a particular aquifer. So that's something else to consider. And a final lesson is that you basically, when you talk about transboundary waters, you often hear narratives of conflict or tension. I'll be honest, I run from language of water wars. I'm tired of it, so that's clearly not listed here. But there is some narrative around some conflict or countries not getting along. So that was not apparent at all in our case. It may be that in these cases, groundwater may be more technical at this point, less politicized, but there wasn't really, that did not emerge at all. So that's a positive, and I think our hope is that some of the work now to understand and take steps towards building common understanding of shared aquifer may help preempt or minimize future misunderstandings before they happen, before increased water abstraction leads to finger pointing on which side caused it. I mean, we're trying to move countries together now towards understanding what's happening. And again, this bodes well for future efforts to advance transboundary cooperation. It doesn't look like there's barriers in terms of existing misunderstanding or existing finger pointing. Trevor, I have 5 more insights on this, which I'd like to go ahead and just knock off and then open it for questions. Is that okay?
Well, we've got 20 minutes left for the whole hour, so if you can move through them fairly quickly, I can see there's a vast amount of material here. It's a life's work, and it's fantastic. Yeah, let's do it, but let's move through it fairly quickly. There's a ton of questions waiting.
I'll try to go quickly.
That's all
5
good.
more additional observations I wanted to present that I think have come through this, which are quite interesting. A little bit of a corollary to the last point. I said it's less politicized in a way, transboundary aquifer cooperation, than some of my experiences in transboundary surface water cooperation. Part of that may be derived from in transboundary surface water cooperation, the issues may already be present. It may already be clear that there's reduced water availability downstream due to increased water abstraction upstream. That's already on the table. In groundwater, it seems a lot of the issues now are around identifying issues, and then after identifying issues, trying to figure out which of those are actually required cooperation. So one thing we had to manage in our project was, a lot of the issues didn't necessarily require cooperation. A lot did, but then there were also others that didn't. They were more localized to a particular country in a shared aquifer. Another issue that's come through, there's varied level of country interest in shared aquifers. So this may be explained by the small size. So aquifers, at least in our cases, tend to be smaller than a lot of the major basins that you find in Southern Africa. So a lot of the large basins may contain large portions of different countries. The small aquifers may contain only smaller portions. And in those smaller portions, you may capture one where a country has a real vested interest, and then other parts may be relatively remote. So that's created something like a little bit of an imbalanced level of interest, I think, which is something that comes through and might be something to be aware of. And then I think something that falls out of that, a way forward, is the final point there, which is greatest need for cooperation may actually be on aquifers where that contain developed or populous portions of 2 countries. So where you can find real interest in multiple countries. Data is another observation. So I've mentioned this probably 2 or 3 times already in this presentation, but it's multiple levels. So I mentioned that even after a lot of effort to collect and synthesize data, knowledge gaps persist. But that's almost skipping over the point that the first starting point is that acquisition of data is a major haul. And and I think this is something that I'm finding even in shared surface waters, that data, simple collection of data as a starting point. This shouldn't be sneezed at. This is a key first step. And this shouldn't be underestimated. There's 5. This is the 4th. So an additional thought, and then work in the Ramotswa highlighted, and I referred to this previously. Our new projects coming online are focusing on conjunctive water management. So I think Ramotswa had a seasonal river flowing through it. So clearly there were linkages there. Moving forward, we're thinking increasingly to look at conjunctive water management rather than kind of exclusive focus on transboundary aquifer management. Although it may be, it may be sensible to focus in cases solely on transboundary aquifer cooperation rather than conjunctive cooperation. In cases it may not, and this may need to be sorted through a little bit more rigorously. Yeah, so basically that's and ultimately this pushes towards a need for guidance on when to think around, sole aquifer cooperation and when to think around conjunctive cooperation. Final observation, I think this is a real academically stimulating one, or intellectually stimulating one, and I think also practically relevant. Where do transboundary aquifer cooperations fit? And it ties back into that previous point: is do we want conjunctive cooperation or kind of uniquely aquifer cooperation? So I think if you look at in the last 10 years, I think a lot of the initial thought on the institutional aspect said, transboundary aquifer management should be incorporated into RBOs, river basin management, effectively. So I would say maybe we rushed into that, and perhaps we need to take a little bit of a step back and say, okay, is it always the case we want to link it with RBOs, or is it more case specific? Or perhaps better spoken, it's probably not an either or. We may want to link with RBOs, but is that it? Do we want to link with RBOs and also perhaps establish some a cooperation around a particular aquifer within a broader basin and or conjunctive management around that particular aquifer? But basically, bigger picture, I think this drives towards a need to sharpen guidance around this. So based on a set of factors, and what would those factors be? I just brainstorming some of the factors that have occurred to us in our work is, what are the aims of cooperation around a particular aquifer? I think that may help to identify if you want to make it more active cooperation, or just kind of delegate it or pass it on to the RBO. The nature of the RBO is how linked with surface water resources might be another factor that may be logical, to say, okay, do we want to go at a more local level, or do we want to just link with the RBO? How large is this aquifer in the broader basin? Is it a relatively tiny thing, or do the boundaries of the aquifer and the basin align? This might be another factor that could push towards greater or lesser linkage with the broader basin. And then another issue is the practical side. So if you want to pursue kind of more localized cooperation around an aquifer, is there financing to do it? So that's another one. And then something else that may come through is how strong, and again, this ties into a point made previously, how strong or capacitated is an RBO to meaningfully cover groundwater. So that's a final point. I had some final thoughts here wrapping up. I'll just quickly run through them. So there have been some positive initial steps, advanced cooperation in SADC. This has been highlighted. There's a range of activities in the two projects that can be packaged together in different forms as we look towards future projects. Major time and energy should be devoted to data collection. This should not be underestimated. And then there's need for strength and guidance as we move forward around a couple issues: aquifer cooperation versus conjunctive cooperation, and then, as I just highlighted, some of the institutional options. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went too long.
No, not at all. Absolutely not at all. Everybody is having a feast. The deep thinking, the care for all of the issues. I mean, I appreciate you saying the data. I appreciate you talking about the future, and using this in other areas of the world. The thinking has been huge, and I can see there's been a lot of work done here, not just professionally but personally as well. The questions on the board here right now are huge. We're not going to get to them all, but I would like to say to everybody that this recording will be available to everybody, so it won't be lost. We'll send the link to this recording in the next couple of days to everyone. But you offer the sobering advice that it's a long haul, it's a long-term endeavour. And that we're not just talking about the less complex surface water, but the more complex groundwater. Not that one is less important than the other, but the groundwater has much bigger issues around it. I'll stop talking. There's a number of questions come up here, and we can do the first couple of them. Thank you for upvoting your questions, everybody. That makes it a lot easier to figure out which questions we should aim for first. Why don't we go for this Julian Anise question here. Julian, I think you're from Australia, if I got that rightly. Julian. Oh, you're right here in my hometown, Adelaide. Well, welcome. How did you define the boundaries of the aquifer? I assume the boundaries are evolving across the past future.
Yeah. Okay. So again, this was this question came up earlier, I think. So basically, this in terms of the broader global assessment, this was done by others, not us, and I believe IGRAC, the International Groundwater Resource Assessment Center, was key to this. And I believe it was, okay. So that's the general explanation. And Herr John Neaston, I think, has produced a paper recently on that, which you can look for, I think, in a special issue in hydrogeology. In terms of the Ramotswa specifically, I'll be honest, I can speak more towards that, because when we started this project, and I even had a slide up on it, we had a kind of a more boxy sort of rectangular shape for the aquifer. And we did geophysical work, which was quite complicated to understand the geology of the aquifer, and within that to kind of delineate where surface water boundary, or sorry, where hydraulic boundaries are, where hydrologic boundaries are, sorry, where surface water flows stop and start. And then within that, so basically within a little bit more loosely or broadly defined area where we were told an aquifer was by global assessments, we had geophysical work done to more precisely pinpoint where within this kind of broader rectangular area the more precise location of the aquifer is. So it was kind of understanding geophysics was what pushed it towards greater precision.
Yep, that's great. Thanks a lot for that question, Julian. Eamon Lai from Victoria in Australia says that, is there a difference between countries that host much of the recharge area and countries that have many major discharge areas, e.g. spring complexes, in either example? Would such a discrepancy affect cooperation and management suggestions?
Okay, the simple answer is yes. I'm trying to find, you said that was a question from?
Yeah, Q&A, a Q&A icon at the bottom from that was from Eamon Lai. It's the second question on the, okay, oh, sorry, it's from Len, sorry about that. No, it's from Eamon. Eamon, sorry about that, everyone.
Okay, is there a difference between countries that host of the recharge area? And so okay, the first question, so he has the two there. So I was answering the second question.
Gotcha.
Sure, yeah, look, you've got, the second question is quite easy. So you've got I'm a strong advocate of adapting institutions to actually what we know in terms of biophysical aspects, like, you know, in terms of what we know in terms of recharge or discharge. Yeah, you've got to tailor institutions to that. So whatever rules for water sharing, you've got to respond them to the realities on the ground in terms of recharge and discharge. So that's the answer to the second question. The first question, you know, in terms of, is there a difference between countries? So that's a quite broad one. What I think, and I think we're still working through definitive, if I can speak to the geographies where we've worked, I think we're still working through definitive answers to those questions. That said, I do think we have clues on those things in terms of differences in countries, in terms of where there's recharge, greater or lesser recharge or discharge, and where the areas are greater or lesser. But the thing beyond that, I think that we know more conclusively is who's using more water. So when you look at maps, when you look at water use or basically use for like different purposes like agriculture, irrigation, you can figure out who's using more of the water. So then, yeah, I think then ultimately, then you would tailor suggestions to those realities. So, and then I think you need to marry suggestions in terms of rules for water sharing or whatever it may be to the realities of where demand for water is and where potential to use or store water is. So as an example, in the Ramotswa project, one of the things we're finding is there's greater seasonal flow on one side of the border in Botswana, but there's greater potential for managed aquifer recharge on the South African side of the border. But we're talking distances there that are quite close. We're talking in the tens of kilometers here. So one of the suggestions that we explored was the potential to divert seasonal flow from one side of the border, Botswana, and store it where there's more capacity, which is in the South African side of the border. So yeah, so basically then suggestions are responding to some of these realities that that Iman is asking about.
Yep, no, that's great. Look, there's one hand up here. Shimulus, thanks for waiting there. There's a whole lot more questions, but we'll just go straight to Shimulus. Claudia, if you can bring Shimulus on screen, then we'll be able to have a conversation. There we go.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for giving the opportunity as well as for presenting such type of an interesting subject matter. Coming to my question, how many meters below the depth of the Earth's surface you draw the bottom of the aquifer? Then how and why you selected that depth?
Yeah. Is that it, or do you have another question?
Do you understand me?
I understand. I can go and respond. On the biophysical details of this, I have to confess I don't have that answer now. You can find the reports online, or I can come back to you on that. But basically, I think borehole depths are in the hundreds of meters, and then in terms of the bottom of the aquifer, I be honest, I don't have that answer fresh on my tongue. But I believe you can find that in our reports.
Yep. So there's reports online.
Okay. Additionally, sorry for 1 minute. Okay. Additionally, is it only one aquifer? This means sometimes there are an interference of aquifer. Some places there will be confined. Some places there will be unconfined. How you get that aquifer?
So in the Stampriet, I believe there's 3 actually. So that's a reason why it's called the Stampriet aquifer system. There's actually 3 different ones there. They're grouped together. In the Ramotswa, I think it's more straightforward. We actually often treat it more as one. That said, we found what we call compartments. So we found dikes. So it's a subject that's we can't say, we're guarded on saying conclusively that these are there's a definitive dike barrier, but it looks strongly to us now that there's around 13 different compartments in the Ramotswa that are largely disconnected, although we haven't established that they're definitively or conclusively disconnected. That's again, and something I've highlighted throughout is the need for more work. But in any case, that could be looked at more conclusively going forward. But although it seems for practical purposes now, we're already kind of operating on this assumption that they're largely disconnected. And for management purposes, we're treating them as a little bit of distinct units. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Shimulus, where are you from?
I'm now in Sydney, but I'm from Ethiopia.
Oh, Ethiopia,
Yeah,
but you're in Sydney, Australia right now.
No, I'm living in Sudan. But
Sudan, sorry about it. There's Sudan. Sorry, I thought you said Sydney. Sorry. Lovely to have you on board. Thanks for coming on screen and asking those questions. And look, if further questions Shimulus, you might like to direct your email to us and we'll get Jonathan on board. We can do this out of session, but much appreciated for coming on board and talking with us. Why don't we just take one last question? It's been really good to have you, Shimulus. One last question, that is from Len Drury. Is there shared legislation? It's the first one on the list there, you might see, on groundwater management for the 2 aquifers that you've been discussing. That is there agreed extraction monitoring and penalties between the countries in the law?
So that's a straightforward answer. This is simple. No. So,
right.
so in terms of, and I guess that's what motivated the need. And I don't know, maybe I could have focused more on the whole rationale for this up front. Yeah. But basically, and I pointed to like 33 transboundary aquifers in the Southern African region at the outset. Basically, there's no agreement as yet around harmonization of legislation to, or shared rules for abstraction. So the simple answer is no. We have reviewed the legislation from the 2 countries, and inadvertently, there's some there. I don't think it was by design, but there's some common aspects to the 2 legislations. So there's that can be built on as you move towards a joint framework for cooperative management of the Ramotswa or other shared aquifers. But as yet, there's no agreement. But then I think what then happened is, as you start this, before you agree on legislation, I think there was a lot of discussion around, we need to understand what's happening. So then that's what pushed all this work to say, okay, let's understand the system. Let's work towards defining where this, we spent ages on working out boundaries for this system. And then even as we define kind of biophysical boundaries of the aquifer, then we had kind of other debates around surface water linkages and kind of political boundary linkages in terms of administrative units on the two sides. So basically defining firmly where we're focusing was actually a major effort. And then within that boundary, kind of understanding some biophysical parameters, I think is what we've done a lot of work on. And then I think responding to that, then that's where we need to have a joint framework that builds on national legislation in the two countries. And that's frankly what we're working towards now. And in the Ramotswa, we've had a lot of debates about where to house this. And I mentioned some of these in a slide in terms of linkage with the basin-wide RBO, Limpopo Watercourse Commission in our case. There's something called the Joint Permanent Technical Committee between the two countries we've also linked with. So there's been a lot of discussion around nesting or housing this in different organizations, but the answer to the question is no, that's not there as of yet. But yes, it seems to us that's a key area that needs to be worked towards in terms of.
That's right. Okay. We've hit the 1 hour mark, and Len, thanks so much for that excellent question, and all of the questions that we still haven't answered yet, the ones we have. Thank you everyone for taking the time and effort to do this. It's clear this has been a labour of love. It's more than that. It's a deeply thought out work across a large number of organisations, inherent in the work, I'd have to say, and right at the centre of it, Jonathan, I've absolutely never heard Transboundary explained so fulsomely as I have today, and hope everyone feels the same way about that. Thanks so much for the work you've done here, Jonathan. We're going to close off now. I just wanted to say one thing, and that is the fantastic team here that supported the webinars, Dr. Ian Reid and Joel Voltman. Claudia, he is on board today. Thank you, Claudia, and Michelle Ha. It's been terrific to work with you. It's a lot of unseen work that goes into these webinars, and we want to keep doing it. And you can see here on the screen right now, there's a few more coming up. Please do join us. There's a lot of major issues we're going to be attacking this year in a webinar most weeks, certainly every fortnight, but probably most weeks as well. And also some online courses there in modelling and in MAR, which we discussed today. All right, I think we're going to leave it there. Jonathan, we appreciated so much your early morning, and everybody else is probably early morning and late nights across the globe as well. We've greatly appreciated your time today. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks, Jonathan. It'll be a bye for now from us. Yep.
Thank you, Trevor.
I hope to meet again. Bye for now, everyone. Yep. Bye.
Subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscription button. For future webinars and online short courses, please visit our website at australianwaterschool.com.au.